Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for being here. I know some folks will be joining us as we start the event, but I appreciate you all being here and ready to start. I'm Benjamin Peters. I'm the director of the Global Scholars Program. And on behalf of the GSP community, I want to thank you, GSP community members and guests, for joining us for the 2025-2026 Global Engagement Symposium. And just so you know, GSP and also a university photographer are taking photographs at this event, and those images may be used or published in a variety of media. So if you have any concerns about that or don't want your picture taken, please be sure to indicate that or let a GSP staff member know. The Global Engagement Symposium is an annual event that showcases GSP's collaboration with non-governmental organizations around the world and the hard work our GSP students have done to support and advance the mission of those partner organizations. Every student in the Global Scholars Program is assigned to a collaborative group in their first year of participation in the program, and each of those groups takes on academic year-long project-based learning with our NGO partners. This year, our students advanced projects for 7 NGOs. Our partners have been Inkululeko in South Africa, Fashioning for Social Environmental Justice here in the US, Tribe in Liberia, the High Atlas Foundation in Morocco, Amnesty International here in Ann Arbor, Alpha Education in Canada, and Peace of Art International in Lebanon. On behalf of our program, I want to express our sincere gratitude to our NGO collaborators for the opportunities you have provided for us this year. Opportunities for students to learn more about your mission and the communities you serve, and to support and advance your important work. Thank you so much. Thank you. Now I want to make a special announcement. I'd like to take a moment to share the exciting news that Mehdi Yahya, founder of Peace of Art International, has been selected as a winner of the 2026 International Bremen Peace Award. The award recognizes individuals and organizations whose work contributes to justice, peace, human rights, and reconciliation internationally, and Mehdi will receive the award for his work advancing peace building, civic engagement, and social inclusion through arts-based initiatives. The award ceremony will take place on May 8th at a public event held at the historic Bremen Town Hall in Bremen, Germany. Please join me in congratulating Mehdi and Peace of Art International on this well-deserved recognition. Now, before I announce our special keynote speakers, I just want to go through the schedule for our event so everybody can know where to be when we need to be there. Until 1:30, we'll be hearing from our keynote speakers and having some time for Q&A, and we can be flexible if students have questions that go beyond that time. Then we'll have a few minutes to transition, and CG6, Collaborative Group 6, will do a presentation here in the amphitheater about their work with Alpha Education this year. Then we'll have about 10 minutes to move from this amphitheater to the 2 conference rooms. If you go out of the amphitheater and to your right, you'll be going to the West Conference Room, and if you go out to your left, you'll be going to the East Conference Room. And there will be concurrent presentations in each of those rooms. In the East Conference Room, which is out and to your right, there will be 3 CGs doing their presentations. CG1 talking about their work with Inkululeko, CG2 talking about their collaboration with Fashioning for Social Environmental Justice, and CG7 talking about their projects with Peace of Art International. If you go out of the amphitheater and to your left to the West Conference Room, you'll be able to hear presentations by CG3 talking about their work with Tribe, CG4 talking about work with High Atlas Foundation, and CG5 talking about their projects with Amnesty International Ann Arbor. So student presenters, you'll see that these are 20-minute blocks, but the first 5 or 6 minutes can be some transition and setting up time. So you don't have to start right on the dot. Just make sure you have time to get comfortably set up for your presentations. Then from 3 o'clock, for 20 minutes, we'll have 2 rounds of poster presentations in the assembly hall, which is straight out and across from the amphitheater. And students from each group will be with their posters and ready to talk about other experiences or answer questions you might have about those projects. At 3:20, I will make a few closing remarks, and then 3:25 to 3:30, CG group photos. So at that time, you'll go to your poster, and we'll take some photos of your group with your poster that we can send to your partners or that you can share. I know there are also CG publicity folks who have a responsibility to run media for your group, so please do that as well, okay? Now it is my great pleasure to welcome back and introduce our keynote speakers, Michaela Minnis and Chloe Halprin. Michaela Minnis is a maternal and infant health policy advocate based in Washington, D.C. She works at the Century Foundation, a progressive public policy think tank where she conducts research, analysis, and advocacy to inform policymakers and the public on issues affecting women, infants, and families. Previously, Michaela worked at the American Academy of Pediatrics, where she advocated for U.S. foreign assistance programs that support children globally and represented the organization and its nearly 70,000 pediatricians to Congress and federal agencies overseeing U.S. foreign policy and international aid. Michaela graduated from the University of Michigan Gerald R. Ford School of Public Policy in 2022 with a Bachelor's of Arts in Public Policy. She participated in GSP for 3 years, 2 years of which she was one of our student leaders. Welcome back, Michaela. Thank you. Chloe Halprin, our other keynote speaker, graduated from the University of Michigan in 2022 as well. And she majored in Spanish and English with a minor in law, justice, and social change. After graduating, she taught English in Spain for a year through the NALCAP program before serving as a Fulbright English teaching assistant in Mexico. While there, Chloe volunteered with a trilingual nonprofit school, building a prospective grants portfolio and helping out in their English classroom. Upon returning to the US, she worked as the grants manager at a community-based nonprofit in Michigan that serves refugee families. Chloe recently started new work. She joined the Washington Office on Latin America, where she contributes to the cultivation of institutional donors to support the organization's work of advocating and advancing human rights and democracy in the Americas. As I said, Chloe was also a 3-year member of GSP and a 2-year student leader. Please join me in welcoming back Michaela and Chloe. Thank you. Thank you, friends. You can just advance. Excuse me.
Us guys. Hello. Is that okay?
Sounds good.
Okay. Thank you, Benji. We first just want to say, give a huge thank you to Benji, Nita, and Ashley for inviting us back here. It's really an honor, and it's even more special to be here with my friend Michaela. So thank you. Yeah, so to get started, we thought it'd be good to give a little introduction to who we are. So about us, my name is Chloe. I grew up in Huntington Woods, Michigan, which is about 20 minutes outside of Detroit. I was a GSP student from 2019 to 2022. I graduated in the spring of 2022 with degrees, like Benji said, in Spanish and English and a minor in law, justice, and social change. And I currently live in Detroit while working remotely for an organization based in Washington, D.C.
Awesome. All right. Well, it's so nice to be here, and I appreciate the warm, fuzzy welcome. So I do like to disclose when I am talking in front of large groups that I do have a stutter. So that just means that you're going to hear me repeat words and sounds. So that's what's happening. Okay, so I grew up in uh, Detroit. I was a GSP student from 2019 to 2022. I graduated from the Ford School with a degree in public policy, and I also minored in gender and health. And I now live in Washington, D.C., and I work on maternal and child health policy. Okay, so I'm going to talk a little bit about my time in GSP and how being in the program really helped to form my values that still guide the work that I'm doing today. So my first introduction to GSP was going on the service learning trip in 2019. So there's a picture of us in front of the Taj Mahal. That was my first time traveling outside of the country by myself. So a really big milestone for me. And I think we actually took that picture on my 19th birthday. So very special birthday with GSP. And also just wanted to thank the program for that being my first time traveling that far. So one of my favorite memories from the trip was working with students at a school for young people with with and without with and without physical uh, disabilities. And they were some of the most resilient young people that I had the pleasure of meeting. And that experience early on really taught me that I wanted to do work on behalf of children, on behalf of young people, to make sure that they have what they need, not to survive, but to thrive. Um, and GSP also gave me space to reflect more deeply on how I think about the world. So one of my favorite pieces of the GSP program as a first year was participating in the dialogues. So, getting to explore parts of my background, such as race, gender, class, and just how that shapes the way I think about the world. And just as importantly, GSP gave me really great friends like Chloe here. So through chai chatters, shared meals, student-led gatherings, I learned that figuring out how to make change really is relational. And that just means that it has to happen through people. So the common denominator of my time in GSP was values. So I developed values that still guide me today. So things like community, peace, nonviolence, um, the human right to health. And these values helped me decide what I wanted to do after graduation. And for me, policy made the most sense because it felt like a way to turn my values into change while still staying rooted in the people needed to make that change. Next slide, please. Thanks, Chloe. Okay, so apologies if this slide is a bit heavy, a bit daunting, but it's an important part of the work that I was doing in 2023 to 2025. And I think that the title will kind of speak for itself. But in my early career, I've hopped around a little bit, I've had different roles, but have been really fortunate to work on health and well-being issues related to young people pretty consistently. My first job out of college was working at Georgetown Law at a gender justice think tank. So I got to work really closely with girls of color on menstrual health justice. Then I got my first big girl policy job and I was working for the largest provider group that represents 70,000 pediatricians and push for good child health policy. So while in my first big girl job, my responsibility was to go to Congress, go to Capitol Hill, and make the case on why we need robust global health funding for children. I would use the patient stories of pediatricians to explain how global health programs move children from surviving to thriving. And what I'm describing is basically lobbying. which I know can maybe be a bad word, but I'm hoping I can kind of desensitize the concept for you all. But during this time, 2023 to 2025, there was a lot happening in the world. Particularly in 2023, I saw how global conflict and violence was rising, with children and young people being harmed the most, even though they are often the least centered in policy. So if you look at the picture, I want to say on the top left-hand side there, that's a stat from UNICEF, who was a really key partner in the global child health work that I was doing. And that stat pretty much sums up what was happening in that um, nearly 50 million children worldwide were displaced due to conflict and due to violence. So I remember a lecture that Benji did on peace during my first year, excuse me, in the program, and I started really making connections between peace and human rights. And I realized that what I was seeing is that it's very difficult for children, for families, for people to have their human rights realized when they are living under violent conditions. I also started thinking more critically about my role being in the US and lobbying for global health while not like being directly in community. Um, And I think GSP really gave me these tools to like even have these questions, to have this mindset, and to ask hard questions about things like proximity, power, and perspective. Okay. Then in 2025, just when I thought things could not get worse, the global health landscape changed drastically. Programs that provide things like food, medicine, critical health care were cut off because the main US department that was responsible for delivering these global health programs was dismantled. And projections showed that millions of lives could be at risk because of these very intentional policy choices. So last thing I'm going to point out on the screen. If you look at the far right-hand side of the screen, some researchers got together and projected that that more than 14 million people could die over the next 5 years because of this department being dismantled. So this forced me to step back and just to keep asking myself some really hard questions. What are my values? What is my role in global health? Oh, sorry, I keep hitting this. What is my role in global health and global policy? And also, am I contributing to systems that actually reflect what I believe? And I realized that the policy systems I was working in were not always stable, especially as a new administration comes in. They typically have different goals, different values, and different approaches to globalism and just like what that means. I also realized that Congress was not going to push back on these policies that could cost that would cost lives. It was also clear that the US's dominant role in global health and on the global stage was shifting. Next slide, please. Yeah, thanks, Chloe. So doing global health policy work led me to shift my focus. I realized I actually want to rethink how people receive care. So now I work at the Century Foundation, which is a progressive public policy think tank, and I get to do just that. I get to rethink policy and how it can be better. So I work on a few different health topics. I work on maternal and child health and reproductive health policy. I also support a coalition of Black uh, women to push for better maternal health policy at the federal level. Because Black women, we are 3 to 4 times more likely to die during childbirth compared to our counterparts. And quite frankly, that's not a great stat, and we can be doing better. So also a part of my work at Century is to help build the case for why we need universal maternal health care. And there is so much that the US can learn from its peer nations who are doing this a lot better than we are. Because at the end of the day, I believe that people should be able to access care and build their families the way they see fit, regardless of who is in power or where they live. And I think overall, this work allows me to stay grounded in the values I first developed in GSP while thinking about how to reimagine systems so that they actually support people. So the bigger questions I carry with me now isn't just where I work. That was like such a big thing once I graduated, but it's now about how I show up. I've also learned that policy change doesn't happen in perfect conditions. It can be slow, it can be uncertain, it can be too fast sometimes. But this work is a marathon, it's not a sprint. I'm keeping this notion close to my heart as a way to look forward, even though this work feels really hard right now. And during this marathon that I'm still running in called policy work, I've learned to come back to my values as a guide. Thank you.
Thanks, Michaela. All right, hi everyone. Um, a lot of what I have to say about GSP is very similar to Michaela because we were kind of doing it together. So like Michaela, my first experience in GSP was this incredible trip that we took to India. It was such a special way to start my time in the program, in part because I made some of my best friends on this trip, but also because it presented a lot of opportunities to step outside of my comfort zone and confront biases that I didn't realize that I had. I think one key example of this was from our time at SKSN, a school for children both with and without disabilities. From playing games with and learning from the kids, I saw how communication and connection can transcend differences like language and ability. And in the fall, once we were back here on campus, similar to Michaela, one of the aspects of GSP that I think shaped me the most were the dialogues. It was there that I learned how to listen intently without judgment, to question my own assumptions, and to approach conflict with curiosity. I also came to realize just how much nuance exists, and that no group is a monolith, that everyone has an individual story that we don't see just from looking at the surface. And I feel like everything I learned, especially when it comes to communication, has helped me form stronger relationships in my personal and professional life. I think GSP also showed me that um, taking time to be in community together, no matter how busy things get, is energizing and essential to keep doing, well, to keep going in general, but especially doing any sort of social change work. And I think the perfect example of this in GSP is Chai Chatter. If you're not going to Chai Chatter, you're missing out. Start today. Um, whether I went up to the Bowman room for 15 minutes or an hour, it was always a space that offered connection, a break from outside stressors, and a reset. And I'm really grateful to have had the opportunity to learn how to make chai with Nita. And I was going through my phone and I realized I still have the recipe. So I need to try to make it again. But yes, it was very special. Sorry. But overall, I would say GSP played a big role in shaping my values, my interests, and my ability to thrive in new and unfamiliar environments. So, graduated in 2022. For many years, I had an interest in working with immigrant communities. So, wanting to better connect with and serve the communities that I hope to work with one day, I decided to apply to be a Fulbright English teaching assistant in Mexico. And I initially applied fall of my senior year. I made it to semifinalists, but I was not accepted. And so I knew that I was still determined to improve my language through immersion. Um, and so as a backup, I decided to go with NALCAP, which is the North American Language and Cultural Assistant Program in Spain. I would say that my year as an English teaching assistant in Spain was full of both beautiful and challenging moments. Um, GSP had given me the tools to critically examine my positionality in the world, and living abroad required a re-examination of my identities in this new cultural context. I recognized the privilege that comes from being an American abroad and reckoned with the dominant role that the US plays on the global stage. For the first time, I encountered racism, xenophobia, and anti-Semitism in a non-US context. which manifested in different ways than I had seen here in the US. And what I learned in GSP helped me navigate reacting to these encounters, especially in my role as an educator at the time. Even though some of what I saw and heard shocked me, I really tried to turn those uncomfortable moments into learning opportunities for my students and my colleagues. So while I was living in Spain, I ended up reapplying for Fulbright in Mexico and was accepted the second time. So I left Spain with kind of a mixed bag of emotions about my experience there, but I ultimately felt better prepared going into my Fulbright experience. So during my time in Mexico, I continued exploring themes of identity and systems of oppression outside of the US. I saw how colorism and classism show up in Mexican society, how my experience as a white English teaching assistant differed from my Fulbright peers who were Mexican American or Black. And I took my responsibility as a cultural ambassador, which is what they literally say you are when you do Fulbright. I took that responsibility as a cultural ambassador very seriously, knowing that what I chose to share with my students may be interpreted as, representing the US as a whole. And so I really tried to bring a variety of stories and voices into the classroom so that my students could understand what I had learned in GSP, which is that no group, including the US, is a monolith. Okay, sorry, there's a lot going on here. In spring 2024, I finished my year in Mexico and returned to Michigan. I started a job as a grant writer at a local nonprofit that works with refugees. I was drawn to grant writing because of its ability to use storytelling to secure resources that fuel social change work. Although the transition back was hard at times, what helped ground me was, like Michaela said, returning to my values. And a phrase that sums it up well for me is think global, act local. Although I was no longer living abroad, I could stay connected to the global issues that mattered to me and still make a difference on the local level. So beyond my role as a grant writer, I also sought out opportunities to continue applying my Spanish. After Trump's inauguration, I got involved with a group organizing in response to the immigration crackdown. And since then, I've volunteered on a regular basis at a free legal aid clinic in Detroit. Even though I'm not a lawyer, being bilingual and eager to learn is enough to welcome community members and get to know their needs, to capture someone's story for an asylum application, or simply hang out with the little kids while their parents are meeting with a lawyer. When so much of the past year has felt out of control, supporting my neighbors is what has kept me going. And like Benji had mentioned, just 2 months ago, I began a new chapter in my career, starting as the grant writer and researcher at the Washington Office on Latin America, or WOLA. Although I just started there and there's still a lot to learn, I feel like I've already gained a new perspective on what social change work can look like in this seemingly impossible moment that we're living in. So in addition to including a few quotes that inspire me that I'm not going to read right now, I thought I would share some of those insights with you. I'm trying to hopefully give you something a little concrete. So the first thing I want to talk about is the importance of archival work and bearing witness. I think this moment feels entirely unprecedented in a lot of ways, but it's important to remember that people have felt the same way at other moments in history. And when the time comes for a restoration of true democracy, the evidence and stories that we gather now will be essential to delivering justice then. So I encourage you, wherever, I don't know if anyone's graduating yet, but whatever town you're in, whatever job you're doing, I encourage you to journal, take pictures, interview your neighbors, capture the truth that those in power are trying to erase. I also want to offer an expanded definition of impact. My boss recently shared an article with me that shows 6 models for understanding impact. I'm not going to talk about all 6. We don't have that kind of time, but I did want to include 2. So that top graph is it exemplifies our traditional understanding of impact. We see that with a given project or program or initiative, things steadily move over time compared to if we didn't have that project or program. Right now, we're not seeing a lot of that upward progress. So I think it's easy to feel like our efforts are futile. However, I think that's where this bottom graph can hopefully shift our perspective. Here we see how without those efforts, without holding the line, things could be even worse. And so I just want to hopefully put a little bit of hope out there that showing up matters and is valuable even when it's hard to see progress in the moment. And I'm happy to share the full article afterwards if anyone wants to see the graphs. You want to do your takeaways?
Okay, so we will leave you guys with just a few things. So from me, what I would say is first, your first job is not going to be perfect by any, but your values should guide you when things feel, you know, shaky. Secondly, community matters. So you're going to need people, whether that's through work or, hobbies. And then lastly, stay connected to the people that shaped you. For me, that has always been this program and the people that I met here.
My main takeaways. I think the first one would be that your path may not be linear, and that's okay. I am very open about the fact that I applied to Fulbright and was rejected, and then I applied to Fulbright and was waitlisted, and then I was accepted into the program. And like I said, I think going to Spain, I needed that experience. I wasn't ready to have the Fulbright experience my first time I applied, and so it's okay. And the fact that my first job after Fulbright wasn't in DC, it wasn't in New York, it was at a small local nonprofit where I had, I think, even more opportunity to grow and make a difference in that environment. I also will say, similar to Michaela, that I say this all the time, that people make the place. It's true about the work environment you're in, it's true about the city you live in. I've always found, and it was true in DSP, that I think sometimes it's worth it to go to the smaller environment where you're around people that believe in you, that are supporting you, versus maybe going somewhere with a big name where no one's there to be a mentor. That was very true at my first job. I had a wonderful supervisor. And then my last thing, which I already said, is think global and act local. No matter where you are, I think there is a capacity to make a difference. And it just may not be on the policy level right away. It may be in the life of your neighbor. And there's a quote that I really love from the Talmud that says, if you save one life, you save the entire world. And I think what that means is just if everyone goes out to do good in just their neighborhood or their city, that adds up to a much larger impact. So I'll leave you with that.
Just stay here for a second. Thank you so much, Michaela and Chloe, for coming back and being in community with us today. In both of your talks, in your reflections on your time at GSP and what you've done since then, I was really encouraged, and I hope our community members are encouraged by the model of engaged global citizenship that you're cultivating and demonstrating in practice, your effective and caring leadership and the development of that impact on other communities, and also your commitment, even in difficult circumstances, locally, nationally, globally, your enduring commitment to positive social change. So thank you so much for gifting us with your reflections on your GSP days and your work since then. It's so good to be with you today. I'm so glad to have you back. We want to have some time if anybody wants to ask questions for Michaela or Chloe. Let's do that for a few minutes. I know that we need to do other presentations too, but Chloe and Michaela have also said to me earlier today that if anybody wants to connect with them at any time through this event or afterwards, that they're ready to talk with you and answer questions. Does anybody have a question for Chloe or Michaela? Mic's on.
Thank you. First, I want to thank you for coming. I guess I was hoping to ask about Chloe about how the end of USAID has affected the perception of the United States throughout the world, um, and if you have any like I noticed that on one of the bags it said like paid for by the American people, and I was wondering, like, has the end of that program shifted how people in the countries receiving this aid see the United States, and if so, how?
Yes. Yes, Michaela here. Great question. Um, yeah, I mean, I think you pointed out really well the picture that was on there, right? Like when folks are getting things like food, medicine, aid, it says that it's from us. And what does it mean when that gets cut off? What's the perception now of, countries? What are our relationships with those countries? I hope I can answer your question. I'm not too involved in the like nitty gritty every day of global child health policy, but I think what I um, was hearing about before I went into new work is that the US wants to essentially get countries off of aid. Um, both sides of the aisle understand that that is important, right? That countries, should be able to decide how, their populations get aid, but I think it's about how you do it, right? It doesn't mean you cut off things overnight, right? So I am curious to see kind of how the, US kind of taking more of like an isolationist approach, and it's also not just the US, it's also the UK that is also, kind of drawing back funds. But yeah, I mean, I'm definitely curious to kind of see, yeah, how like how are people going to view the US, right? Like, there's been a lot of great progress that is now going to be halted, um, because of pulling back. Um, but hopefully that means we can encourage, really, I think, overdue conversations about, you know, countries being able to decide what's best for them. And I hope that answers your question. Okay.
Hi, my name's Miley. Also, thank you for coming and talking to us. It's so interesting. I was wondering, both of you guys talk a bit about your perception of what it is, like basically what it means to be American or what it means to like be who you are in the global landscape, right? And how that has affected the way you see your work. And I was wondering, like, um, Michaela, you were talking about how you used to work more in like what it seems to be like foreign policy a bit, and yes, and then you went more into like the American sector, and I was wondering, how do you like, and also for you, like how do you see the change in like American politics and how it affects the world, and how do you manage to continue your work, and how do you manage to like not get disheartened by what's going on, and continue the work you want to do like on a global landscape whilst knowing your position or your impact?
Okay, so the first part of your question was kind of about like identity as an American. I feel like I mentioned this, but I feel like it was very true for me, like spending 2 years living outside of the US, and coming to realize like what do people think America is? What do people think an American is? And what did I think an American was before? And I think because I was in the role of an educator, and like I said, I was suddenly like the representation for an entire country. Wait, I'm going to interrupt my own thought. One thing I did want to say is I think living in two countries for an entire year made me realize, wow, just how diverse Mexico is, or just how diverse in different ways Spain is, and that really led me to think I shouldn't assume Mexico is just this way or Spain is just this way, because I know the US is not just this way or this way. And so I think, what does it mean? I feel like we're all wrestling a little bit with what does it mean to be American, but I think when I was in those spaces trying to have humility, trying to always say, this has been my experience whenever I shared something, and trying to bring in other like, but I know this has been my friend's experience, or this has been someone else's, and trying to kind of put that caveat on it. And then how do we not get disheartened? I think for me, it's a mix of, again, like doing local work. I think now with my new job, I'm working all day on this very high level work where we're discussing how do we have a democratic transition in Venezuela? How do we ensure free and fair elections in Guatemala? Like these very high level conversations that are meaningful and important. And also it's me working on my computer in my bedroom all day. And finding something like going to this legal aid clinic has been so grounding, because even though it's 3 extra hours, of my day, it's being in community. It's being around people that are showing up every day to do the same work because they care the way that you care. And so for me, that's showing up at the legal immigration clinic. For you, that might be something else. And I really encourage you to explore and figure out what that can be for you. And again, this idea of like bearing witness, archival work. I've been kind of refreshing some of my history about Latin America and instances in history when there's been reconciliation, there's been tribunals, and all of this evidence that people gathered through really horrific times have been essential for any chance at justice. And so it's dark, it's heavy, but that's something I'm trying to remember too, is how can we just capture truth that people want to remove. Sorry, Michaela, go.
Thanks, Chloe. Yeah, so to answer the first question, navigating identity as an American while doing foreign policy, oh boy, it's something I thought about a lot when I was doing that work. To be quite frank, global health has roots in colonialism, and I think that when I was like going to Congress and talking about these programs, there was support for these programs on both sides of the aisle because some members of Congress, go on things like mission trips, and so like they have a connection, to the work maybe in a different way than I do. But I do think what was helpful about that I think helped with that wrestling I was doing is getting to speak to Congress, speak to staffers in the perspective of a pediatrician who know children like the back of their hand. They know what they need. They're not there to, talk about different things, right? They're there to talk about children and say, hey, these programs are good for kids, period, full stop. That's it. And I think like when you come with that neutral perspective, Congress tends to respond a bit better. I think kind of some of the, I guess, for lack of better words, flack around foreign assistance is that some of the orgs that are responsible for implementing the programs are funded by the government. So it's like when they get funding, it's also funding the salaries of the staff. And so Congress kind of sees it as like, okay, you're continuing to lobby for money that we just gave you, right? And it's like, where is this money going? What is it doing? But when we would go to the Hill as pediatricians, saying, hey, like, these programs are just good for children. So I think, if you do want to do global health policy, foreign policy, I think that looking at like trade association groups, provider groups, I think is actually really helpful, because they're kind of coming at it more from like, I've spent my life's work is to take care of children and I know what they need. So I think having that perspective was really helpful for me. Secondly, and very quickly, because I know we might be on time, how do I stay in the work when things, feel really hard right now? I think working at a think tank actually really gave me that boost that I needed. It was really heartbreaking to see these programs go away. And I was like, okay, like we need to rethink how we do this work, right? So that's what think tanks do. That we think on how can policy be better. So that's at least what I'm looking to is we're kind of preparing for when the environment is more open and say, all right, we are ready to go in and to, make things better. So that is how I am staying in the work.
Thank you so much, Chloe and Michaela. We don't have time for any more questions, but please connect with Chloe and Michaela throughout the day, through the next couple of hours. Let's thank Chloe and Michaela again for coming back with us at GSP. Thank you so much, friends. Thank you.